All right, get ready to dive into something we all use every single day, but don't always think about strategically: communication. More specifically, how we communicate at work.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got a script for professional training video, and it is jam-packed with all sorts of communication strategies. But we're going to do more than just, run through the bullet points.
Yeah, we're going to break down those strategies, figure out why they actually work, and hopefully give you some real world examples so you can start using these tips right away.
That's right.
So, the first thing this training script really focuses on is active listening, which I think we can all agree is super important.
It really is. It's easy to think of listening as this passive activity,
Mm.
but active listening, it's a skill. It's something you can develop, and it can really give you an edge in the workplace.
I think we've all had that experience where we're in a meeting and we realize our mind is like a million miles away.
Oh, absolutely. Happens to the best of us.
So, what can we actually do to become better active listeners?
Well, one of the simplest but most effective things is to just resist that urge to interrupt. Let the speaker finish their thought before jumping in with your own ideas or comments.
It's definitely easier said than done sometime.
Yes, it is. But it makes a huge difference in terms of showing respect and making sure everyone feels heard.
So, active listening check. The next thing the source material talks about is clear and concise messaging.
Yeah, you probably already know this, but less is more, especially when it comes to written communication like emails. But here's something to think about. Have you ever considered your email signature as part of your communication strategy?
Hmm, not really.
Well, think about it. It's like a mini billboard for your personal brand. You can use it strategically to maybe highlight your expertise or direct people to important resources.
That's a great point. Okay, so moving on from email signatures, let's talk about nonverbal communication. And I mean, this goes way beyond just making eye contact.
It really does. Nonverbal cues are so powerful, they can convey confidence, sincerity, even your emotional state. And in the virtual world, these cues are even more important because sometimes all people have to go on is like your camera presence.
The source material actually says that research shows video calls can actually build more trust and connection than, say, a phone call.
Which, I mean, it kind of seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, it does. So why do you think that is?
I think even though it's not the same as being face-to-face, video calls let you pick up on those nonverbal cues that you just wouldn't get on a phone call.
Right, like a nod or a smile or even, a furrowed brow.
Yeah, exactly. It adds a layer of richness to the communication that audio alone just can't replicate.
That makes a lot of sense. So another thing the source material gets into is this idea of adapting your communication style.
Yeah, and this isn't about, trying to be someone you're not. It's more about being mindful of how your natural style might be perceived by others and then making small adjustments to, make sure your message is landing the way you intended it to.
So have you ever felt like you and a coworker or a boss were just speaking totally different languages?
All the time.
Well, this is where adapting comes in. Like, the source material even talks about tailoring your emails based on the recipient. So if you know someone is really busy and values, concise messages, get straight to the point.
Right. But if you're emailing someone who maybe prefers a more detailed approach,
Hmm.
you provide that additional context and information.
So it's all about understanding your audience. Now, the training script also gets into the topic of emotional intelligence, or EQ. So how does that play into workplace communication?
Well, EQ is more than just, being nice or friendly. It's really about self-awareness. So understanding your own triggers. It's about reading the room.
So kind of like sensing the vibe and how other people are feeling.
Exactly. And it's about self-regulation, not, flying off the handle when things get stressful. And it's about relationship management. So building bridges instead of, burning them.
That's a great breakdown. And the training script even gives this specific technique for managing emotions. It talks about using I statements, which is about like expressing your feelings without placing blame.
Right. So instead of saying, you're always late, which is put someone on the defensive, you could say something like, I feel frustrated when meetings start late because it throws off my whole schedule.
It definitely feels less accusatory. But do you think using I statements really works? Like, it kind of sounds like something from a self-help book.
It might sound simple, but it's incredibly effective. Think about it. Imagine a conflict between like two coworkers where one says, you totally messed up this report. It's full of errors. Now imagine the other person responding with, I feel really stressed and overwhelmed when feedback feels personal.
Wow, that second response totally changes the dynamic. It acknowledges the feedback without being defensive.
Exactly. And it opens up the conversation for like a more constructive dialogue.
So emotional intelligence is about recognizing and managing our own emotions, but also being aware of other people's emotions and how we're impacting them.
Exactly.
And it all kind of ties into this next challenge, giving and receiving feedback.
Ah, yes, the art of feedback. It can be a bit of a minefield, right? But our training script focuses on how to give feedback effectively. It should be specific, actionable, and delivered with empathy.
And they talk about this thing called the sandwich method, which is like starting and ending with positive feedback and putting the constructive criticism in the middle.
Yeah, the sandwich method it gets a lot of, I guess, criticism for being formulaic. But I do think there's some value in it.
Do you really? I'm kind of torn on the sandwich method. What are your thoughts?
On one hand, it can make criticism easier to swallow, kind of softens the blow a little bit. But on the other hand, I do worry that it can feel a little manipulative, like you're trying to hide the real message.
I can see that. So it seems like it really depends on the situation and the people involved.
It does. The key is to always be genuine and authentic in your feedback, regardless of the method you use.
Okay, so moving on, the source material also gets into the very relevant topic of virtual communication etiquette. And this is something that, everyone is dealing with these days.
It really is. And the training script stresses the importance of maintaining professionalism, even when you're not face-to-face.
So it's not just about showing up in your pajamas for a Zoom call, right?
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
making sure your technology is working properly, minimizing distractions, muting your microphone when you're not speaking. These all sound super basic, but they make a huge difference in how you're perceived.
They really do. And in addition to all those tips, I think it's also crucial to be really clear about your availability and response times in the virtual world. Like setting those expectations up front can prevent a lot of frustration down the line.
Absolutely. It's all about setting those boundaries and making sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay, now shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about effective written communication. We've touched on email a bit already, but the training script goes deeper, talking about how written communication kind of lives on longer than spoken words.
It does, yeah. Emails can be forwarded, saved, referenced later on. So being mindful of your tone and clarity is essential. It really impacts your professional reputation.
And I love this quote from the source material. Consider the recipient's perspective when choosing your tone and language. It's such a great reminder to approach written communication with empathy, even though we're not face to face.
It's so easy to fire off a quick email without thinking about how it might be perceived on the other end, right?
Yeah.
But taking that extra moment to consider the recipient's perspective can make a huge difference in how your message is received.
Absolutely. Now, even with the best communication, sometimes conflict happens. And the training script acknowledges that, framing conflict as something that can actually be managed productively.
It's true. Conflict isn't inherently bad.
Mhm.
In fact, when it's handled well, it can actually lead to growth and innovation.
So the key is not avoiding conflict altogether, but learning how to navigate it effectively.
Exactly. And the training script really emphasizes finding solutions, not placing blame. It's about untangling that knot together rather than just, yanking on it and making it worse.
I love that analogy of untangling a knot. Because it's true, when we approach conflict with that goal of finding a solution that works for everyone involved, it becomes a collaborative process, not a battle.
Right. It's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a way forward that everyone can live with.
And it seems like mastering conflict resolution is almost like a superpower in the workplace. It shows maturity, emotional intelligence, commitment to finding solutions.
It absolutely is. It's a skill that can take you far in any career.
Okay, let's wrap up this first part of our deep dive with a topic that's really at the heart of, I think, any thriving workplace: open and transparent communication.
Yeah, the training script talks about creating an environment where communication flows freely, where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, concerns, even mistakes.
So it's not just about, being chatty or having an open door policy.
It's deeper than that. It's about creating a culture of trust where people feel safe to speak their minds, to share different perspectives, even to disagree respectfully.
Exactly. And this really ties into that idea of psychological safety, which we touched on earlier. So how does psychological safety actually work in the workplace?
Well, psychological safety is that feeling of knowing that, you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up, for sharing your ideas, even for making mistakes. And when
Mhm.
people feel psychologically safe, They're more likely to take risks, to be creative, to collaborate more effectively.
It sounds like open communication isn't just this, nice to have perk. It's actually like a competitive advantage in today's world.
It absolutely is. In a world that's constantly changing, organizations that prioritize open communication are the ones that are going to be able to adapt, innovate, and ultimately thrive.
So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, from active listening and nonverbal cues to the importance of psychological safety and open communication. It's clear that communication is way more than just
It
words.
really is. And it's a skill that can be learned and improved upon throughout your career. It's not just some innate talent that some people have and some people don't.
Exactly. Everyone can become a more effective communicator with the right tools and techniques. And the good news is we've got a whole training script full of those tools and techniques that we're going to keep unpacking in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground in that last part about communication. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about this idea of adapting your communication style. It's something that the source material talks about a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we approach communication as kind of a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right, like we have our style and that's it.
But it really should be more like having a toolbox. You know, you use different
Yeah.
tools for different jobs.
Exactly. And the source material talks about how important it is to adjust your style depending on who you're talking to.
Right. And it's not about like putting on a fake persona or being inauthentic.
Yeah, you don't want to be like a communication chameleon just changing who you are all the time.
Exactly. It's more about recognizing like what are your natural communication tendencies? And then how can you maybe make some small tweaks depending on the situation or the person you're communicating with?
I think we've all had that experience where you're talking to someone and you just feel like you're not speaking the same language.
Oh, absolutely. It
Yeah.
happens all the time, especially at work, where you have such a mix of personalities and communication styles.
The source material gives this example of like tailoring your emails based on who you're emailing. So if you know someone is really busy and values, conciseness, you just get straight to the point.
Right. But if you're emailing someone who maybe prefers a more um, detailed approach, you would give them more context, more background information.
So it's really about understanding your audience and meeting them where they are.
Exactly. And when you do that, I think it makes people feel heard and understood.
Hmm.
And that goes a long way in, building stronger relationships.
This makes me think about something we touched on earlier, emotional intelligence. The training script really dives into why EQ is so valuable in the workplace.
EQ is a big one. And, it goes way beyond just being nice.
Yeah, it's not just about being like a friendly person.
It's about self-awareness. It's about understanding your own triggers and like how you typically react in certain situations.
Right, so kind of like knowing yourself.
Yeah. And it's about reading the room. It's about
Yeah.
social awareness, being tuned into other people's emotions.
So it's kind of like being a good observer of people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about self-regulation. It's about like not flying off the handle when things get stressful.
Staying calm under pressure.
Yeah. And then finally, it's about relationship management. It's about building bridges instead of burning them.
So EQ is really this combination of skills that can make you a more effective communicator.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, do you think people can actually learn to be more emotionally intelligent, or is that just something you're kind of born with?
I think while some people are naturally more in tune with their emotions and the emotions of others, I do think emotional intelligence is something you can develop and strengthen over time.
So how do we get better at that? Where do we even start?
Well, like I said before, self-awareness is key. It's really about paying attention to your own emotions, noticing how you react in different situations, and from there you can start developing strategies to kind of manage your emotions more effectively.
I like that. It's kind of like becoming an observer of your own inner world.
Exactly.
The training script actually mentions this very specific technique for managing emotions using I statements.
Mm.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like in practice?
Sure. So imagine you're in a meeting and a colleague keeps interrupting you.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. So instead of saying something like, stop interrupting me,
Yeah.
which is likely to just escalate this situation, you could try saying something like, I feel frustrated when I'm interrupted because it makes it difficult for me to express my thoughts fully.
It's amazing how, like, a small shift in the language can make such a big difference in the tone of the conversation.
Exactly. And by using an I statement, you're taking ownership of your feelings and you're explaining how the other person's behavior is impacting you, but you're doing it without making it a personal attack.
I like that. It seems like I statements could also be really helpful in those kind of tricky situations where you have to give someone feedback, like constructive criticism.
Definitely. It's a word to deliver feedback without putting the other person on the defensive right away.
Yeah.
The source material actually talks about the classic sandwich method for giving feedback. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. I don't know if I've ever like consciously used it,
Yeah.
but it's where you start with something positive, then you kind of slip in the constructive criticism, and then you end on a positive note again, right?
That's it. That's the sandwich. And while it can be a little formulaic, I do think it can be effective in certain situations, especially when you're dealing with someone who's maybe a little sensitive to feedback. But I think you have to be careful not to come across as disingenuous or, like you're trying to sugarcoat the message.
Right, it's all about being genuine. So how can we make sure that our feedback is both like constructive and genuine, regardless of whether we're using the sandwich method or not?
I think the key is to be specific and actionable. So instead of just saying something generic like, great job,
Yeah.
you can say something like, I really appreciated how you used visuals in your presentation. It made the data so much easier to understand.
Oh, I like that. It's so much more helpful to get that specific feedback, instead of just a general compliment.
Exactly. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that our training script emphasizes a lot, the importance of open and transparent communication in the workplace.
I think we can all agree that that's a good thing, but I'm curious, why is it so important? What impact does it really have?
Well, I think open communication is really the foundation of a healthy and productive work environment. It's about creating a culture where people feel safe to speak up, to share their ideas, their concerns, even their mistakes, without fear of, judgment or retribution.
It sounds great in theory, but I think a lot of people struggle with how to actually create that kind of environment, It's easy to say, let's be open, but much harder to put it into practice.
It's definitely a process. It takes effort, but the payoff is huge. When you have open communication, you have better decision-making, you have more innovation, and you have a more engaged and motivated workforce.
So how do we even begin to build a culture of open communication?
I think it starts with leadership.
Hmm.
Leaders have to set the tone. They have to model the behavior that they want to see from their team. But it's also about individual team members making a conscious effort to, really listen to each other, to be open to different perspectives, to create that space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas.
This reminds me of that concept of psychological safety that we talked about earlier. Can you remind us what that is and why it's so important for open communication?
Absolutely. So psychological safety is that feeling of knowing that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up, for sharing your ideas, or even for making mistakes. It's about feeling safe to be vulnerable. And it's absolutely crucial for fostering open communication.
Because if people are afraid to speak up, then they're going to hold back their ideas, their insights, and the whole team misses out, right?
Exactly. Everyone loses when there's a lack of psychological safety.
So it seems like building this culture of psychological safety is an ongoing process. It's not like you can just check it off your to-do list and be done with it.
Definitely not. It's an ongoing process. It's about building trust. It's about encouraging vulnerability. It's about creating that space where people feel comfortable taking risks.
So as we kind of wrap up this section on communication styles and emotional intelligence, it's fascinating to me how all of these things are so interconnected, like active listening, emotional intelligence, open communication, psychological safety. They all play a role in creating a workplace where people can really thrive.
They do, yeah. And I think it's through mastering these skills that we can really unlock our potential as communicators and build stronger, more productive relationships with the people that we work with.
Okay, we've covered a lot in this section. We talk about adapting your communication style, the power of I statements, the importance of open communication, and psychological safety, and how all of those things contribute to creating a more positive and effective work environment.
It's been a great conversation so far.
Mm.
And I think it really highlights how crucial communication skills are in today's world. Like, no matter what you do, no matter what industry you're in, being a good communicator is going to help you succeed.
Absolutely. Okay, so in our final part, we are going to take all these insights and talk about some specific strategies for putting all of this into action. All right, we've covered so much in this deep dive into workplace communication. It's amazing how much goes into it, from those tiny nonverbal cues to building that big picture idea of a culture of open communication.
It really is multifaceted.
So what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today?
I would challenge them to think about, just one small change they can make this week
Yeah.
based on everything we talked about. Maybe try using those I statements more, or really setting aside time to be an active listener in your next meeting. Small steps can lead to big changes.
I love that. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that communication is a skill. It's not just an innate talent.
It really is.
And that means it's something we can all work on and improve.
Absolutely, and it's an ongoing journey, right?
Totally. There's always more to learn. There's always room for improvement. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.